Hi there, from a lovely um, late afternoon in South Africa as the sun starts to set over here. I thought of discussing the value of symbolic thinking as it relates to resilience today. And I think for those of you who are interested in symbolic types of thinking, this will be an interesting angle to consider. And for those of you interested in resilience, this might be an additional way of thinking that might enhance your own understanding and maybe practice of resilience. All right. So let's maybe start with a few examples of symbolic thinking and how it may relate to this moment in time. And please understand that the symbols that I will discuss here are not meant as necessarily accurate interpretations of the psyche of humanity at the moment, or it's not offered as the most appropriate symbolic expression, merely as examples. So the moment in time right now, of course, as most of you will be aware, is the 7th of April 2020. And like most of the world, we are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So what I found interesting in talking to patients and friends, other people, when people allow themselves to express some of their anxiety and some of their difficulties, they would use certain kinds of language, and this reminded me very much of the image of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, this is an image from Christian mythology, from the Bible. But the four horsemen are identified as death, famine, pestilence, and war. All right, so now as I observed people's reaction to this threatening pandemic, it seemed to me that they were expressing their fears along these four lines quite vividly. I think, in the first place, the notion of death as this ultimate specter, whether it is economic death or death from disease or whatever form it might take, I think, of course, a lot of people are particularly affected by the amount and the extent of deaths of others, and of course, the threat of death as it may manifest in their own lives. So I think that's an easy one to relate to. Pestilence, I think, equally easy to relate to, seeing that we are dealing with sort of an expression of pestilence, some form of disease. So I don't think much needs to be said about that. Famine, well, I think the phenomenon of panic buying relates quite well to this symbol or this symbolic expression, where people are acutely aware of not having enough to sustain themselves. Now, of course, while a lot of focus was placed on the interesting phenomenon of people buying toilet paper in excess, I think that was merely one of their forms of expression that this took. I think people in a time of crisis become acutely aware of their lack of resources, and it can certainly manifest in this way as well. At the same time, there is this voracious search for answers and or vaccines or medicines, and people tend to anxiously grab at straws or maybe information that may turn out to be valid, but at the time that we grab at it, it's certainly not proven to be the panacea that we hope it would be. So these are all, in a way, possible expressions of this symbol of famine. Then war. Well, I think the division into different camps become a very vivid expression of this. So you either sort of draw the line across party lines, sort of political party lines, and this is what this party believes, and that's what that party believes, or you draw the line between people who favor economic rescue and people who favor rescuing people from disease. Another vivid sort of expression of this would be the what struck me from sort of reports from the US running up to the lockdown or the stay-at-home phenomenon was how many firearms were sold, as if people expect other people to become dangerous in a violent manner. So a mini expression of war. Other expressions, symbolic expressions that I think are relevant and that in my view of things are quite present. I think the idea or the symbol of the hero and the heroic is quite present for a lot of people, and quite rightly we see lots of reports of people heroically acting selflessly and on behalf of other people, and which is one of the qualities that we often describe to the hero, is somebody who can go up against the odds, and very often not necessarily in terms of personal reward, but for the sake of other people, sort of standing in the breach, as it were. And again, the warrior ethic is very often ascribed to these people. They are the front line, they are the warriors, they do battle, and so on and so forth. So the heroic warrior image is evoked. Another image that is at play is the image of the king being the firm leader who does what is right in a decisive manner, who knows what to do, who can lead, who can take and give direction, who does so in a benevolent way. And we see this vacillation between either sort of the good king, when leaders are seen to be taking the right kind of action, and this projection of almost sort of almost divine qualities attributed to these people. And then, of course, the opposite, the bad king of, this person will lead us all to destruction, and how can they be so stupid and then they care about their people at all, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the images or symbols that I think are at play, and I think there are probably many, many more than these, but I think these will suffice to give you an idea of how symbolic thought can relate to present circumstances. Now, why would one want to do this, and how does it relate to resilience? So let me start off with a simple notion of a picture paints 1,000 words, and how an image or a symbol being significantly more meaningful than just a mere image, and I'll explain the difference in just a moment, but how that symbolic image can actually contain and express in ways that we do not consciously perceive very many complex thoughts and feelings. In a time of crisis, where there is an abundance of difficult thoughts and feelings, fantasies from the unconscious arising, symbolic representation of some of these states become valuable because they encapsulate or they capture something of the complexity in a vivid image, and again, a symbolic image, not just any kind of picture, but something that is symbolically meaningful. And therefore, it becomes a way to almost have a very, let me use another simplified example. Again, this is not quite right to speak of this example in terms of symbolism, but to give you a sense of what I'm speaking of. So on a computer screen, you have the icons that represent something vastly more complex. And when you click on the icon, you gain access to the complex programming that lies beyond that. And it starts to have utility for you. Just having these images just out there does nothing for you. You have to actively engage with this. But in the same way as an icon can represent something very complex and very often unseen, but in a way that has utility, so a symbol can also be the icon come alive without us having to understand some of the intricate programming that lies behind that icon. And in doing so, we have a way of holding on to this complexity in a way that's not overwhelming, and that becomes it becomes possible to communicate great amounts of complexity in a very short burst, either to ourselves or to other people. So it gives form, it gives structure to great complexity, and complexity that is often also unconscious, or at least less conscious. It might also give us possible direction going forward. So if we see the world kind of aching and asking for the heroic, it might allow us to start accessing something of the heroic inside of us, and to allow us to understand how sometimes small actions can be heroic. How when you take leadership, even in a very small set of circumstances, you might be accessing something of that king energy, especially if you can do it in a calm, clear, benevolent fashion. So it can also give us a bit of a roadmap for the immediate future. What kind of energies or patterns we need to evoke in ourselves, and what will also be meaningful not to only to ourselves. Of course, we are as affected as our neighbors, but will also be meaningful to the people around us, because it fits into that sort of shape, that hole that the crisis leaves. Of course, I'm not suggesting that everybody should act according to this, to each his own, and to each in terms of what is given to them. But I think that potential lies in symbolic thinking. I should maybe add that one thing that I find surprisingly absent at the moment is, again, from Christian mythology, the notion of death and resurrection, especially as this is happening around Easter. So the Christian celebration of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I'm a little bit surprised that the notion of death and rebirth is relatively absent. The only places I've seen people reference things that remind me of that is more on a national front, and the idea of that we as a country will rise above this and so on. And maybe that's sufficient, but I am a little bit surprised that it's not more vividly accessed by many people. And maybe it's just what I'm exposed to, but I find that surprising, seeing that this seems to be such a relevant moment in time and the synchronicity of this happening around Easter also seems quite relevant. Maybe as people celebrate Easter more vividly, this will settle into the psyche a little bit more, but that remains to be seen. All right, so I would I would suggest that if it's possible for you, and if your mind is attuned to this kind of thing, to take a more symbolic look at what is happening both in your own home, in your own life, but also in the world around you and the kind of language that people use. So I think this can be very informative, but I think it can also be very containing and possibly even structuring your future actions and future thoughts, which I think will allow you to gain access to a greater sense of resilience because one is a little bit less overwhelmed by the complexity of feeling. All right, that's that for today. I hope that you are well. I hope that you find value from these thoughts. Again, as always, please consider subscribing and or forwarding the link to people who might find it valuable. I appreciate your time, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.